We appreciate all of the guests who have appeared on our show and sincerely thank them for providing you, our audience, with useful information. However, the advice our guests provide is theirs, and we encourage you to seek out a professional if you have specific questions about any topic we cover on the Crushing Debt Podcast. On this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast, protect your stuff.
Welcome to the Crushing Debt Podcast with your host, Florida attorney Shawn, where our goal is to help you get rid of the financial bullies in your life.
So welcome back to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. My name is Shawn, owner and founder of Venerable Law. And George, nice to see you again. How you doing?
What's up, buddy? How are you?
Good. George Corbello, your financial coach.
I am.
What you got going on?
Dude, I'm a little scared.
Why?
It's that time of year.
Halloween?
Oh, yeah, I guess that's one thing to do itself, but it's that end of the month kind of thing, right? Is it like, oh my God, do I have money? Or money of the month, or the month of the money, or whatever you say.
I was gonna put you on the spot and make you do it at the end of the episode. We'll see how that works out.
Well, you already know I'm already gonna fail.
Yeah, we got that going on. So we do have a guest for you this week, which I'll get to here in a minute. Before we get there, real quick, want to talk about our one of our two sponsors, Sam Cohen with Attorneys First Insurance. Sam does E&O or malpractice coverage for attorneys and title companies all over the country, really. He's got a focus on Florida, where he's located. He also likes Texas. He also likes Alaska. And one day he's going to explain to me why those three states. But he can write malpractice coverage, E&O coverage, anywhere in the country, regardless of where you are located. So a great way to support the show is to support Sam. A great way to support Sam is to introduce him to an attorney or title company anywhere really in the country. And I also understand that he can, whether you've had a claim or not, he can still get you insurance. So you can find him, Sam, at attorneysfirst.com, or that's his website, attorneysfirst.com. So I was looking through my Facebook and looking through the memories on Facebook. Now, we record the show in advance. I don't think that's really an industry secret.
We're not live?
Well, you and I are live right now,
gotcha,
but
okay.
as they're listening to us, it's not live.
Thanks for explaining.
So episode 292, if you want to check it out. Episode 292 is with an attorney called Michelangelo Mortallero. I think I said it right. Anyway, hopefully he'll listen and he'll tell me if I got it right or not. But Michelangelo is an estate planning attorney. He's also formed a company called Fortress Asset Protection. Now, he formed that company with this week's guest, Jason Sampson. So Jason is an attorney. He is the co-founder of Fortress Asset Protection and the founding attorney of Venerable Law, which focuses on a wide array of business matters, from startups to business succession planning and everything in between. Jason has been a practicing attorney for well over 2 decades. His focus is on building long-term relationships with business owners to structure their business organizations for success. So welcome the other half, the better half of Fortress Asset Protection. Welcome, Jason.
Personally, I like the introduction to the better half because we all know that's absolutely true. So,
So, it's interesting. One of the topics I've really wanted to talk about, one of the things the law firm my law firm really wants to bring into more of a focus is business debt and asset protection from a business perspective. Now, we can also talk about, from a personal perspective, from the business owner perspective. But why don't you tell us a little bit about Fortress Asset Protection? Why did you create it? What's the purpose?
Sure. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. Thank you for having my partner previously. Fortress Asset Protection was really just a natural growth of Michelangelo and I working together. So coming from the big ginormous law firm 4 years ago, I started Venerable Law to really work with business owners in the local community. So if I, used to work for the ginormous, Fortune 100 and all these ginormous corporations, working with their committees and boards and, all that craziness, really what I spent most of my time doing was banging my head against the wall, herding cats, and pretty much my mantra was, help me help you and stop getting in my way. So I took that kind of mantra or that energy and put it better to work with people that actually cared about their businesses and were really the principal owners behind it. So I work with small businesses. And when I say small businesses, it's not a revenue cap, it's not an amount, and I am a small business myself, so it's never meant to demean or undermine anybody. It's really, if I get to work with the principal owners, not a board, not a committee, that's what I define as a small business, because you are still a manageable, mom and pop, if you will, family, or, friends if it's partners in professional services or something like that. So I've been doing that for a bit. I was part of another company that did home health care. I helped put that board together, get it up and functioning, and then got back to what I really like to do is the law and other type of business, because I didn't know anything about that one. But as I was in that industry, the senior care business, Michelangelo was very well known. So he was, kind of omnipresent throughout that community. And our CEO says, this is a guy you have to go meet. He's definitely a referral partner that we need. The easiest thing for that initial meeting was about 5 seconds. He said, oh, okay, well, yeah, you're a preferred partner. I know your business. I know your CEO. She's a client. Give me the pamphlet. You're on the list. Tell me about your business law firm. And he held back for about a good 10, 15 minutes to see if we actually liked each other, because our general mantra is most attorneys suck. Of course, with Shawn and I as the exception of the rule,
Absolutely.
Hopefully. But, we wanted to see if this was going to be a normal person conversation, or let me show you how big my thing is. And, sitting in an initial meeting of I'm cooler than you, I make more money than you, and, the typical attorney talk. So it didn't go that way at all. And after about 10 or 15 minutes, he let me know that I actually had a typo on my website. So I knew that he had actually read it and was very interested in what I do. And we made fast friends from there. So fast forward past that, we started as pure referral partners, and it was really, depending on the stat you look at, anywhere from 80 to 90% of small business owners don't have any sort of estate plan in place, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. One of the biggest problems with estate planning is even the terminology, right? So most lawyers, let alone the average public, thinks I have to have an estate, right? That's what it's called, estate planning. And one of my favorite things to talk about is if you have stuff, you need to protect it. If you have a business, this is your baby. This is what you've spent, oftentimes your life's work trying to get done, trying to get successful. You're living to the next week, whatever it may be, but it's not tied in with anything. There's no estate plan. There's no will. There's no trust. And if you get hit by the bread truck, what happens to your biggest asset that you have? And there's no succession plan whatsoever. So as we started to look at just pure continuity planning, meaning what happens on Monday if you're hit by the bread truck on Friday, one of the things we started looking at very easy was a structure that I used quite a bit was a holding company structure, right? So we would have these guys. One of our first, asset protection clients through Fortress was a man that was running a commercial contracting company and had anywhere from 8 to 10 crews out there on high ladders and scaffolding inside these huge sky rises. And at a given moment, listen, I'm sure they had, a lot of insurance, but if someone falls off a scaffolding, this is a bad day for everybody. And we all know insurance. The whole idea is they love taking those premiums. They're not so happy about paying out claims, and they find a lot of ways to get out of paying those claims. Why would he have all of his operating capital sitting in one operating account so it's a target right then and there? Someone falls off scaffolding, it's bad. I'm not making light of it. But if you did nothing wrong, you shouldn't risk losing everything you've ever built over someone's accident. Now, if you were culpable and did it, we're not talking about, hiding and running and committing any sort of fraud or anything like that. We're talking about things that you cannot control that you're otherwise supposed to be insured for, and all of a sudden putting too many eggs in one basket. And this is the client that we easily showed. We're not even talking about anonymous. We're not even talking about becoming a ghost on public records, which is, another thing we'll talk about. Just a basic business structure separated him from 80 to 90% of his liability. So he was taking most of the money, putting it directly into the holding company, and then pushing it back into the operating company as needed. So if any day it was a target, that company had very little sitting in it, oftentimes only what you needed to have payroll. So that's where we started out with Fortress Asset Protection. He and I, do a fair amount of reading, audiobooks, YouTube. We're always learning, always growing, and always adding on something else. And what you'll hear and what you'll see, throughout this industry is a lot of very interesting characters. We have certainly seen a lot of interesting TikToks and other social media from non-lawyers. And listen, I'm not, as I said, my mantra, and you'll probably hear it a few more times throughout this podcast, most lawyers suck. I mean, let's be 100% honest about that. So I'm not so, high up on the profession that everything has to be done by a lawyer. But we see these individuals on social media talking about trusts and all these other things. First of all, we're hearing outright bad advice, outright incorrect advice, and selling a bill of goods. And, what we love to hear now is, I have a trademarked trust. Well, let's be clear what that is. A trademarked trust, let's put it out there. Let's make sure that everybody really feels this one. Has nothing to do with the way the trust works. Nobody is rewriting the law. Nobody's creating law. No one has a patent on the substance of what is inside this thing. They have a trademark on the frickin' name. And they're selling it like they got $1 million value over a really cool name. There's a titanium trust, there's that trust, and people and non-lawyers are selling these things like to me it's a bill of goods. Me personally, I would never want a trust, written or sold by, non-lawyers.
And trust law varies slightly. I mean, a lot of the concepts are the same, but trust law varies slightly from state to state. So if you're getting your TikTok advice from some guru out in California that's creating trusts, but you live here in Florida, the trust that guy is promoting may not even be valid in Florida based on Florida law.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I had a very interesting intake yesterday on the way home. This guy was about to close a real estate deal, was in Michigan, and found our TikToks for Fortress and listen, we are super grateful and literally blessed. That just gave me goosebumps. Like the following that we've got in such a small period of time over a few months, the calls, the direct business that we get off of TikTok, which literally as a lawyer blows my mind because that, number one, I didn't think it was my demographic. Number two, I literally said to myself, who is finding their professional service provider off of TikTok? We're usually watching, funny dances and whatever else. It's probably a good source to figure out some bourbon, but that's a whole other. I digress. But so we had this individual, and he was diehard on getting someone on the phone yesterday. Coming out of a meeting, one of our assistants, begged me, like, this guy's really trying to get a deal done. Can you give him a call? No problem. I got a 45-minute car ride home. I'll pick up the phone. Super gracious. The guy was happy to get. I had no idea he was in Michigan, number one, and he's trying to apply land trust law from Florida to Michigan. And he's asking me, well, does it say in the Florida statute that it only applies to Florida? I said, sir, I'm going to be quite honest with you. I can't quote the statute off the top of my head, especially after a very long day. But I'm going to tell you, just as a matter of law, it doesn't necessarily state basic foundational elements like this law only applies here because it's a state law. Like it has no force effect. And we know, and I couldn't quote off the top of my head if Michigan was one of them, most states don't acknowledge land trusts. And he was trying to get us to form a Florida land trust to take Michigan property. I said, sir, I would have no part of that. First of all, I'm not licensed in Michigan, couldn't give you any advice in Michigan. If you need a local referral partner, we've got tons of them. I can get you hooked up. But it was he was a very nice gentleman. And we ended up even talking about some other options for possibly holding the real estate, because I think he was a little bit misinformed about the advantages of the land trust. Although we do them, we like them. He was also very well off to handle it through an LLC, which we could help him with. But at the end of the day, it was very interesting because it was a quite difficult conversation and Shawn, I'm sure you can, enjoy this and join in the back and forth on this topic is, I often say, don't confuse your Google search for my law degree.
Right.
And again, what I think Google in that type of information age has added, I think is great, honestly, because we now have well-informed consumers, and it's taken a lot of the fluff out of law.
Are they, though?
Yes, that's a very good point. But it has to be, within certain boundaries, right? And listen, I was having a conversation with, our financial partner this morning, and he started off the conversation, this guy already thinks he knows what he wants, and he's got, 6 different formats in his head, this type of trust, that type of trust, this type of LLC, and just be careful. And I said, that doesn't necessarily bother me as long as you're coming in with an open mind. If you have an idea of what you want and kind of understand our, grammar or, our terminology, if you will, it's generally a good conversation. When you're trying to educate them for the majority of your initial meeting, it's a little bit hard sometimes because it's not something you can necessarily consume all at once. So if they come in as an informed consumer, that's great. But yes, sometimes a little bit too much information is a little bit difficult to handle. So
I gotta say, you had mentioned before itself, like business, they don't have the estate planning in place. But why is it that most business owners don't have that? Like, is there something else that that they're just not aware of to be able to do that?
I think it's an education thing. That's really what I get on my soapbox, right? So when I started my TikTok series through my day-to-day law firm Venerable, I made it a little bit more about kind of my journey of how I got here, coming from big law and learning these things. And it wasn't until I met Michelangelo, honestly. There's something about the law where estate planning is, until I met Michelangelo, was not flashy, was not fun, was very boring. I'm teaching estate planning at USF right now, which is hilarious to me. But and I told my class first day that this is the one subject in law school I wanted to stick something sharp in my eyes. So it's not fun stuff to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about death and disability. But I think if one positive thing that COVID gave us was people saw, okay, I might not live forever. Everybody obviously knows that, but I think it was a little bit more visceral, and you saw people around you having some really difficult health problems. But I think it's education. I really think it is. Estate planning, I just think the terminology, I want to call it something different because people think they have to hit this level. And what I've talked about very frankly is, I started off my career as a criminal prosecutor in Massachusetts making $30,000 a year. If you told me then that my salary now or what I make from revenue from my firm I was taking in, and I wasn't driving around, with gold chains all over me and Rolls Royces and yachts, I would have called you crazy because it's night and day different.
Right.
But what happens with most people, and I think lawyers especially, are as you jump up in pay grade, you automatically jump up in expenses too. And I think you are probably, very, very well aware of that, George. So It's interesting because people... And we sit with them all the time. And I always make sure to give shout outs when I'm talking about, I never talk about client specifics or their names or, names of business or anything. But if I give them a shout out through their narrative on social media, I always make sure to give them the compliments that they deserve because they come in, well, I'm not really there yet. That's like one of the most common themes. I don't really have it yet. Do you have young children? Do you have a home? You need an estate plan. What happens if you and your wife are out and you're in a bad car accident? Who's taking care of your kid other than the babysitter that you gave $8 an hour to? These types of things. And I think the business owners listen. Michelangelo, his first question to me was, how many of your business owners have their estate plans taken care of? And I had a great chuckle at that. I said, listen, brother, I'm working on trying to get my business owner clients to have their business plans taken care of. Give me some time, I'll get there. But the fact is, if anybody runs a business, 90 probably 5% plus are spending their day trying to take care of making the widgets.
Right.
And that is the main mantra. That is the main, tail that's wagging the dog. And I get that. And it's unfortunate that they've gone through and they don't understand the problems until they become the problems, right? And that's where oftentimes I go through with business coaches or whatever else, marketing people, what's your ideal demographic for a client? And I was like, I have absolutely no idea because I have them from every edge of the spectrum, from startup to super tiny mom and pop restaurants all the way up until, software companies that are making, millions and millions of dollars in financial firms and law firms. I have a really weird niche practice of representing a bunch of lawyers now. And I've got a good group of super energetic entrepreneurs that were all former Green Berets, and they're all in this little network. Very, very intelligent guys. And they invest in, I think they've got right now probably 12 different businesses. So I have no ideal demographic, but you have to be a believer, right? So if I spend the time with you and I can't convey my value proposition to you, you weren't meant for me. And that's fine, and not everybody is. And you can't sell precautionary tales to everybody, right? Because especially a lot of folks that have been doing it forever, it hasn't been a problem yet, right? And that was the big firm times. Like, well, we've been doing it for, the last 20 years. We've been very successful. Okay, until you're not. Until one person decides to say something, and literally this house of cards of billions of dollars will fall.
Right.
Without fail.
So I want to real quick give out your contact information, which again we'll put in the notes, but it's jsampson@fortressassetprotection.com, which is also the website, fortressassetprotection.com. What is the name of the TikTok channel? Is it also Fortress?
We got super creative on that one. Yeah, it's at Fortress Asset Protection.
I figured, but I didn't know. Yeah. So the only other place that I would know of to get really great information on TikTok is the Corbello Financial Coaching TikTok page as well. So if you want to go there too. But I did have a question for you. So one of the things we talked to Michelangelo about was individual estate planning. And I think we also touched on, if you're a business owner, why you would want to do some estate planning. But what I thought you and I could focus more on today was more of the asset protection planning, which estate planning is part of. Sure. You want to make sure you have an estate plan so that if something happens, your family, your business, whatever, there is the succession plan there. But then there's this concept of asset protection planning. So if I'm the business owner, if I get sued, let's say I'm in a car accident and I get sued, well, I don't want somebody to get access to my business through the lawsuit. But at the same time, let's say one of my assistants is driving around delivering something to the courthouse and gets into a car accident and injures somebody. I don't want the injured person to kind of get a backdoor into my personal stuff through the business. So you do a lot of that kind of stuff as well, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The general format that we talk about that type of liability is inside and outside liability, for lack of better terms, and whatever it takes for you to visualize it. If anybody, without talking to an asset protection lawyer or an estate planning lawyer, and let's be honest again with the mantra of most lawyers suck, estate planning lawyers a lot of times will throw themselves out as asset protection attorneys. And I'm not here to bash any industry. I'm not here to bash our colleagues. I guess to some extent I am. I don't know.
I mean, it's just the third time you said it, but that's okay.
After I say, most lawyers suck, I'm saying that I'm not bashing them. But it's just a tough thing because I don't think a lot of people are mean-spirited. I don't think most of our colleagues are ill-intentioned. In fact, I think it's the opposite. But they hold themselves out to be certain things that the general public thinks that they're getting. And I tell you, we've had so many referrals, so many initial intakes from folks that thought they were talking to, asset protection lawyers at first at another location. Another guy, he was just selling me the same revocable trust that he sells everybody and calling it asset protection. Well, if anybody is talking to you about a revocable trust and calling it asset protection, don't walk from that office, run, because there is no level of asset protection through a revocable trust. Anytime we are removing individual holdings or property from your personal name, I guess you could potentially call that a layer of asset protection, but we don't really rely upon that. So when we talk about, taking business assets and looking at inside-outside liability, I think if anyone is at any sort of education on the realm of asset protection, they're thinking about what we refer to as inside liability. So say one of the easiest low-hanging pieces of fruit is you own rental property. Now, what blew our mind is the amount of people that hold multiple pieces of rental property in their personal names. Why is this bad? Well, we'll get to that in a minute.
It drives me crazy.
It's absolutely insane to me. And this is an area of law, where my big law experience and having a commercial background and representing commercial banks, I didn't think that this was a thing. Having come from legal communities like New Jersey, New York, and Massachusetts, you had to be a lawyer to close a real estate deal. And you could tell people, why are you holding 15 pieces of property in your individual name? Here you have a title company. I represent a lot of them. I'm not bashing that industry, but they're not lawyers. And they're allowing, or not even having a suggestion of, hey, this is now your 10th property. Why are you taking it in your personal name? So put all that aside. If they think about it, they're thinking, okay, I'll get this one piece of property into an LLC. That may or may not be good. That's better certainly than having it in your individual name. Oftentimes when we see the DIY solutions, there's 15 pieces of property in the one LLC. So that, again, not a recipe for success, and I'll tell you why. But they're at least thinking about it inside liability claim, meaning if something happens on that piece of property, how am I protected? If something happens in relation to a rental, is it going to feed back to me through that asset? And that's why they throw an LLC up, because I am no longer an individual owning it. You can't sue me individual right out of the gates unless you have some crazy corporate veil-piercing, argument. And I've set up corporate liability protection. Corporate shield protection has been in existence since we've had corporations. Now, there's a whole other piece of that where a lot of people think they're protected where they're not. But that's at least the realm that some people think of. The worst situation, Shawn, is what you talked about and what we refer to as outside liability that nobody talks about. I'm more concerned with things for, number one, there aren't insurance for, or you're probably underinsured. It's the car accident. It's you go to a bar and, someone, pushes your wife. There's a bar fight. Not that any of us are young and, throwing hands anytime soon.
My wife would be throwing hands.
Yeah,
what you talking about, man?
Exactly. I'm much more concerned with that nowadays than I am myself.
She's like, baby, I got this.
Yeah. All right. I'll be over here with my second drink. No problem. I am married to a crazy Cuban, so
There you go.
We'll leave that. Just stay where that is right now. But at the end of the day, that there's no insurance for that, right? So some crazy circumstance happens, no insurance. Listen, the personal injury lawyers of the world, and if I was truly smart, that's what I would use my law license for. But again, not bashing that entire industry. They run an asset search on you. They're getting paid a percentage of what they take in. Who is a better target? A person that was sitting with 15 assets in their personal name, or someone that comes up as a ghost? You tell me, right? So that's a clear situation that could clearly be protected, even if you just had one LLC. We take it many steps further because here in the state of Florida anyways, state of Florida, single member LLC is one of the easiest corporate structures, LLC structures, but we talk about business entities, call them corporate structures. In the country, Florida has one of the easiest ones to pierce. The Olmstead decision back in 1984 the court allowed another individual to come after someone's ownership directly in. So there used to be that you had to sit on the outside of the corporate veil, and unless you did some really fraudulent activity, we couldn't pierce it. We couldn't get through that wall. The court said in that instance, no, we're going to allow you to go around, get to the individual, take their interest, foreclose them out, and take their company from the inside, just as another asset. That's super dangerous. So we take it another step further, right? So why even have 10, 15 LLCs in your name? We can give you an anonymous LLC in the state of Florida. Let that marinate for a minute. Florida doesn't allow anonymous filings. Florida has the requirement that you either disclose an authorized representative, a manager, or a member, and most everyone takes that to think that it has to be someone with ownership interest in the company. And everybody sits there with their personal residence on there, which I love. I've got 15 pieces of rental property. I want to make sure all my tenants know whose door to knock on when I've got a broken, pipe. I don't want to get that knock on my door, I can assure you. So that's dangerous in and of itself if you have someone upset with you. The other side is piercing that veil liability, going after your ownership interest in those LLCs. We would much rather have somebody sit behind another wall of protection. We often use the state of Wyoming. Wyoming has become the new Delaware, if anybody knows, all these states, Nevada, Alaska, Typically, if you look at it, they're states that may not have a lot of tourism traffic, so they want to drum up another line of business. Wyoming has been the state of choice for many years. Anonymous filings, you don't have to disclose by state law. You are not required to disclose owner, manager, anyone with ownership interest. According to public records in Wyoming, I don't know how many LLCs I have under my name right now, but it's not because I own them. It's because I was the organizer of them. We then take that anonymous filing LLC and have it own 100% of the Florida LLCs, and there you have become a ghost on public records, and your holding company is one of the best protected in the country. Single member, they fully acknowledge is 100% protected. There are actually some claims that you might have to go to the state of Wyoming after getting the other judgment to try to enforce in Wyoming after you got your first judgment, not where you want to be.
That was what I was going to ask you. In other words, when I have clients come to me from time to time and say, I want to form a Wyoming or a Delaware or a Nevada or this or that. And I've always kind of been under the assumption that, if you live in Florida, have everything self-contained in Florida, especially if you're a landlord. If it's just the Wyoming LLC and you're a landlord, wouldn't that Wyoming LLC need to be authorized to do business in the state of Florida if you wanted to, for example, evict a bad tenant and bring a lawsuit?
Yeah.
So then to layer it with the Florida LLC.
Yeah. So you're correct. So the way we get around filing as a foreign entity doing business in the state of Florida, and that's actually a very interesting requirement that people think is implied to do active business in the state of Florida. Not all businesses that have business members in the state of Florida are required to register as foreign entities, number one. But your example, this is one that we deal with quite frequently, and that's exactly how we use this structure more often than not. Now, as a foreign entity, you can file a bond in court to establish the permission to file in that lawsuit as a plaintiff, as a non-resident agency without becoming a foreign entity. Is that a little bit much, especially if you own a bunch of rental real estate? Yes. So, and this is where we see the DIY problems. I've felt so bad for so many people that they've done the DIY solution of, listen, they come into my office and it's music to my ears. And listen, if we don't make $1 off of them and they're well set up and no problem. I've educated someone for 30 minutes and I'm happy for them. One of the nicest couples in the world came in one day and they started talking to me about a Nevada asset protection trust, probably the strongest you can have in the country, and a Nevada LLC. I'm like, what do you need? You don't even need me. This is great. What's going on here, folks? And they said, we did this, we formed this. Well, first of all, their name was all over the Nevada LLC. Problem number one. Problem number two, they then registered it as a foreign entity in the state of Florida. So once you do that, folks, you then lost all those lovely protections that you got by filing out of state. So that's why we do the 2-layer approach. 2 layers are always better than one, right? We call it peeling back the layers of the onion, but it also accomplishes that same goal that you asked about, Shawn.
You also kind of want to balance against not getting too complicated. I mean, I remember one of the first real estate investors I worked with, they came to me and they said, and I'm going to get it wrong, but just to make the example, we've got this LLC. Now, the member of the LLC is the trustee of a revocable trust, and the beneficiary of the revocable trust is a corporation. The corporation's an S corporation, and the owner of the S corporation is 3 other LLCs, and one of them is in Wyoming, and the Wyoming LLC member is another trust. And I'm like, dude, enjoy. I don't even know where to start to unravel that mess. Enjoy. So part of it, too, is just you want to keep things simple enough that they can understand it, their CPAs can understand it, they can file what they need to file, but you want to keep it complicated enough that it detracts people from trying to go after them as a target.
Yeah, so we always say, one of our biggest things, and that we put on repeat all the time and tell people, listen, it's not my job as a lawyer to substitute my appetite for risk for yours, right? Yeah. And it always sounds like a self-fulfilling prophecy that I think you need 15 entities because I'm the lawyer forming them, and of course we charge by entities. So listen, we're here by, you want low end of protection, you want the ultra super complicated to go offshore, we'll do it both ends of the spectrum and everywhere in between. You have to be comfortable with it. You have to understand it. And here's the thing, this is another thing that I'm very happy to tell everybody. We tell everybody during our intakes, we're not the cheapest, we're not the most expensive, but we bake into our flat fee structures consulting time. Because listen, I did it for years. It's not malpractice. It's not unethical. But you give people this big stack of books and go forth and conquer, young squire. Here's your stuff. And they go, I'm going to go talk to my CPA. I'm going to go talk to my banker. And all of these people have, all this higher education. And I'm sitting in between, I have to be the quarterback to figure all this out. So when you walk out with an asset protection structure from us, you've got a physical org chart where you can see this is what it looks like in reality, because God knows they're not following all the legal, this, member over here, just like you said, trustee over here. And they also walk out with a corporate protection memo that says do's and don'ts. This is what we suggest. This is what you should do. And, oh, by the way, if it's related to that LLC, call us. Call us when you're talking to your banker. We will get you that extra resolution that bank needs to see. Probably not legally required, but, banks are fun and they want their own little, form on their stationery or whatever it may be. We'll get that done. We'll talk to your CPA to make sure that you're not taking it in the shorts because they now see 15 LLCs. Well, they're all disregarded entities for tax purposes. So there's no, big level of complication there. But again, yes, it has to be right for you. You have to understand it. I've got a lot of clients that like that super complicated structure. And quite frankly, the nerd in me loves it. Like, you got me to map out. We sat, Michelangelo and I, with a man that drove 3.5 hours to meet with us on Tuesday, had already sent us a considerable amount of work and wanted more. And essentially told us, not essentially, he told us these words: you have a blank check and I want even more. And of course, the greedy part of us was like, this is the best day of my life.
Awesome. Nice.
The ethical side of us was like, okay, let's retreat and not get crazy and figure out structures that he can manage. But he understood more than most the benefits of these things and having the multiple layers to the onion approach. As complicated as it could get, as long as he could understand how to function in it, that's what he wanted. We have a asset protection planning for doctors seminar coming up soon, and doctors and other professions, they just happen to love all the super complicated stuff.
Do you know when it is?
It's early in November.
Early November?
Yeah.
Early November 2022. And then if someone is interested in signing up, would they do it on the website?
They can just contact me through the email, and we can.
Okay.
It's on Eventbrite, and we have all those electronics. I should have been a little bit better prep for that one.
Well, and the only reason I ask is hopefully people are listening to this
Yeah.
episode in December of 22 and June of 23 and November of 23. So if you're listening before November, actually absolutely contact Jason for details. If you're listening after, still contact Jason because you may have others coming up.
Yeah, we do the
after that.
seminars, and we sometimes we try to do it by industry. We have open calls. Michelangelo has a beautiful new building in Tampa. We have seminar space. We're usually doing a few seminars a week there, so it's a nice setup. So we can always get you hooked in with the current one too. So.
Yeah, I drove by his office the other day. I haven't been in yet. I need to stop in and say hello. So
You drove right by our office.
I drove right by. Well, I was taking my kids somewhere. I didn't really have
we
time.
welcome
to,
kids too.
I didn't have
It's
time to
kid-friendly.
stop and socialize.
All right.
So just to sum up, everything on the internet is true. You should always listen.
Absolutely. That's what I thought too.
You don't need insurance. All you need to do is have like 6 or 7 different LLCs scattered amongst 15 states.
Well, put your personal information on everything.
Put your
right?
personal
It's-
Make
information.
sure you sign as many things as possible.
Don't read anything before you sign it. Just go ahead and sign it. No. Thank you. We appreciate you being here as a guest on the show. Is there anything that you want to wrap up with, or anything that we missed or didn't talk about?
I think just because I haven't said it enough, I said most lawyers suck.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. That's the biggest thing.
I don't know. Do I put an explicit tag on it because he said the word "suck" like a million times?
I think it would be great.
Yeah.
No, it does it? No, come on.
I don't
now.
think that word's explicit. I think
No,
we're
you're
there.
good. You're good.
So definitely check out Jason, fortressassetprotection.com, the TikTok website, the Curbelo Financial TikTok website as well. I also want to talked about Sam at the beginning of the show, so I want to talk about Mark now. Our second sponsor, Mark Purvis, has been with me since the very, very, very beginning, episode number 1 of the show. He is our editor, but he's got a website called LegacySpotlight.com, and actually maybe something you and Michelangelo want to talk to him about, because what it is a website where you can capture stories for future generations. So Mark will come out and he'll set it up, and he's an Emmy Award-winning videographer. He's got 20 plus years of experience, and he'll come out and help record those stories for future generations if you want to capture those stories for your family. So that's LegacySpotlight.com. Thank you, Mark, for your support of the show as always. Thank you again, Jason, for coming out. We'll definitely let Michelangelo know we enjoyed having the better half out here on the show. Other than that, anything else you want to wrap up with, George, or do you want to try the line?
I'm gonna try the line itself. It's just so most
didn't write
lawyers,
it.
yes, I did write it down.
Oh,
Most
you
lawyers
terrible.
suck. I just want to say that itself. But hey, we just want to make sure that you have more money at the end of the month than more month at the end of the money.
Absolutely.
I love it.
And I don't even think you looked down to read it while you were
I did
saying
it, but I'm one of those that I have to write it so I don't sound like an idiot. So I still sounded like an idiot, but that's all good.
okay.
We're all good here, brother.
It took me like 20 tries to get it right. So thank you again, and we will talk to you in next week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.
If you have questions that you think would make a great topic for a future episode, please email Shawn or connect with us on social media. Shawn Yesner and Yesner Law, PL, are Florida licensed attorneys. The information contained in this week's episode is not a substitute for legal advice. Your situation may differ, especially if you are located somewhere other than the state of Florida. If you have questions, please contact our office or contact a local attorney. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.